Let me go." Amelia's voice cracked as she clawed at the hands dragging her through the rain. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong." Nobody listened. Nobody ever did. Then her legs gave out. The cold pavement rushed toward her, and two arms caught her before she hit the ground. She looked up through the rain and saw a face she didn't recognize. But something in her chest said, "This is the person I've been running toward." If you're watching this for the first time, welcome, hit subscribe, and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The rain was the kind that didn't warn you. One moment the streets were dry. The next the whole city was drowning, gutters overflowing, headlights blurring into streaks of white and red, and every person on the sidewalk running for cover like the sky had declared war. Adrian Valenti didn't run from anything. He walked through the rain the way he walked through every room in his life, slowly, deliberately, with the quiet certainty of a man who had never once needed to prove that he was the most dangerous person present. His black coat was soaked through within 30 seconds. He didn't care. He had left a meeting early for the first time in 11 years. And he was still deciding whether that bothered him. It did bother him. Everything bothered him lately. His driver, Marco, had pulled the car around to the east side of the old Marchetti warehouse, neutral territory, far enough from the financial district that no cameras would catch the license plates, close enough to the river that voices got swallowed by wind. Adrian had used this block for 100 meetings he'd never put in writing. Tonight's meeting had been about a shipment that wasn't where it was supposed to be, and a man who kept changing his story about why. The man would not be changing his story much longer. Adrian pulled out his phone, checked the time, and started walking toward where Marco had parked the car. The meeting was done. The problem would be solved by morning. That was how his world worked. Problems became solutions. And the people who created the problems disappeared quietly into outcomes that no one asked too many questions about. He was 10 feet from the car when he heard it, not a scream, not a crash, a sound like something being broken gently like a bird walking into glass. A soft, terrible sound that didn't belong on a street like this. He stopped. From between two industrial dumpsters to his left, a figure lurched into the open. She was running, but her body had long since stopped believing. Running was still possible. Every step was a negotiation between her legs and the pavement, a desperate, failing negotiation. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her in strips. One sleeve of her jacket was torn from the shoulder. She had no umbrella, no bag, nothing in her hands, and her eyes were moving the way only one kind of eyes moved, the eyes of someone who had spent the last Lazarus believing they were going to die. She saw Adrian. She did not slow down. If anything, something about seeing him made her push harder, not toward him exactly, but toward the general direction of him, toward the shape of another human being in the dark, toward anything that was not the darkness she was running from. She covered 12 feet before her knees unlocked completely. Adrian moved without thinking. He crossed the space between them in 3 steps and caught her before her face met the pavement, both arms, full weight, the impact hitting him hard enough that he had to plant 1 foot back to absorb it. She was lighter than she should have been. People who weighed this little had not been eating. People who ran this hard through streets like this on a night like this were not running for exercise. "I've got you," he said. It came out quieter than he intended. She grabbed the front of his coat with both hands. Not clawing at him, not fighting, grabbing. The way a person grabs something when they have decided that this, whatever this is the last chance they are going to get. Her face turned up toward his. She was younger than he expected. Mid-20s, maybe. Brown hair plastered flat against her cheeks. A cut above her left eyebrow that had been bleeding long enough to stop, and eyes that were wrong somehow. Not wrong, in a dangerous way. Wrong in the way of a person who had just been shown something that the human brain is not designed to process. She looked at him the way people sometimes looked at someone they'd been searching for without knowing it. Like recognition, like relief, like the answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. "They're going to kill me," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know who they are. I don't know what I did. Her grip on his coat loosened. "Don't," Adrian said sharply. But she was already going. Her eyes closed, her body went slack, and Adrian Valenti, a man who had not held another person without intention in 15 years, stood in the rain, holding an unconscious woman he had never seen before, in a part of the city where no one asked questions, while the river swallowed every sound. Marco appeared from around the car, took one look at the situation, and reached for the phone. "Don't call anyone," Adrian said. Marco froze. "Get the car. We're taking her to the house. Boss Marco." That was all he said. One word. Marco understood, because Marco always understood, and within 90 seconds the car door was open, and the woman was laid out across the back seat, with Adrian's coat folded under her head. Adrian got in the front. He did not look back at her for a long time. When he finally did, his eyes dropped to her neck, to the thin chain barely visible beneath her collar, and the pendant resting against her collarbone. He reached back, lifted the pendant with 2 fingers, and stopped breathing. The pendant was small, silver, old, the kind of craftsmanship that didn't exist in modern jewelry, each line hand-cut, each curve deliberate. The symbol engraved at its center was simple, a compass rose with one arm longer than the others, and beneath it, 2 initials intertwined so tightly that most people would never notice the second one at all. Adrian noticed. Because the last time he had seen that symbol, he had been 7 years old, standing at the edge of a funeral for a woman whose casket was empty. He set the pendant down gently against her collarbone, sat back, folded his hands in his lap. "Drive," he said to Marco. "Where?" "Home." The Valenti estate sat at the end of a private road, 40 minutes north of the city, a property that did not appear on public records, was not listed with any real estate index, and had no address that could be found by conventional means. The house itself was large in the way that old money was large, not for show, but for permanence. Stone walls, wide hallways, rooms that had not been redecorated since Adrian's father was alive, because Adrian had never seen a reason to change what worked. He had lived there alone for 6 years. He had never brought a stranger inside. The woman was carried to the guest suite on the 2nd floor. Adrian's housekeeper, Elena, 63 years old, Croatian, and constitutionally incapable of asking unnecessary questions, took one look at the unconscious woman and immediately produced dry clothes, warm blankets, and the kind of quiet efficiency that had made her invaluable for 2 decades. "She's been hit," Elena said, examining the cut above the woman's eye. "Not recently. This is at least an hour old. How bad? Nothing that needs a hospital. But she's cold, she's exhausted, and she hasn't eaten today. Maybe not yesterday either." Elena looked up at him. "Who is she?" "I don't know." Elena held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, once, and turned back to her work. Adrian left the room, walked to a study on the ground floor, poured a glass of water because he didn't drink anymore, stood at the window, overlooking the garden, dark, rain-flattened. The rose bushes his mother had planted 30 years ago, now dense and architectural, in the way abandoned things sometimes became, and thought about a pendant. He thought about a symbol. He thought about a funeral where no one cried, because no one was allowed to. Across the house his phone buzzed. He already knew who it was before he looked at the screen. Dominic, his cousin, his second in command, his most loyal advisor, and the person who had been, for the last 11 years, the only family Adrian trusted with anything that actually mattered. He let it ring. By morning the woman's fever had broken. Elena appeared in the doorway of the study at 6:14 a.m. Adrian had not slept, had not particularly tried, and said, "She's awake. She's asking where she is." Adrian stood, straightened his shirt, walked upstairs. The woman was sitting up in the bed with the blanket pulled to her chest, and for a moment when he walked in, she looked at him the way she had in the rain, that strange, searching look, and then it was gone, replaced by the controlled, wary expression of someone who had learned very young to hide how afraid they were. "You're in my house," Adrian said, because there was no gentle way to begin this conversation. "You collapsed last night. I brought you here." She was quiet for a moment. Processing. "Thank you," she said. "I need to leave." "Where will you go?" The question landed on her face like a slap, not because he meant it as one, but because she clearly had no answer. Her jaw tightened. She looked away. "My name is Amelia," she said. "Amelia Carter. I'm a waitress. I live in Greenpoint. I work at a diner I work at a diner." She stopped, corrected herself. "I worked at a diner. I don't think I can go back there." "Why not?" She looked at him. Something about his directness seemed to recalibrate her. She had expected something else, reassurances, maybe, or demands. Not questions. "Because they know where I work," she said. "Or they will by now." "Who are they?" "I don't know." "What did they want?" "I don't know that either." Her voice cracked slightly on the second sentence. She steadied it. "I know that sounds like I'm lying to you. I know I'm a stranger in your house, asking you to believe me about something I can't explain. But I'm telling you the truth. I woke up 2 days ago, and there were men outside my building. Men I had never seen before, men who knew my name. She met his eyes. No one knows my name. I've lived in New York for 5 years, and I've made sure no one knows my name. And somehow these people did. Adrian pulled a chair from against the wall, turned it around, and sat with his arms folded over the back. Tell me everything that happened, he said. From the beginning. She studied him for a long moment. The wariness in her eyes was not foolishness, it was the earned caution of someone who had survived on it. She was deciding whether to trust him. He didn't try to make it easier for her. Trust that came easily wasn't real. You're Adrian Valenti, she said. Yes, I know who you are. Most people do. Then you know I should be terrified of you. Are you? A pause. I was more terrified of the men behind me. She let out a slow breath. 2 nights ago, a woman came to my apartment. I had never seen her before. She was older 60s, maybe. She was crying. She said Amelia stopped. Pressed her lips together. Continued. She said she had been looking for me for 15 years. She said my name wasn't my name. She said I was in danger, and that I needed to run, and that I couldn't trust anyone who told me my past didn't matter. The room was very quiet. What happened to her? Adrian asked. Amelia didn't answer. She didn't need to. I ran, she said. I took nothing. I just ran, and for 2 days I kept running until she looked at him. Until last night. Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then, show me the necklace. Her hand went to her throat immediately, a reflex, protective, the instinct of someone who had worn that pendant so long that touching it had become like touching her own pulse. She looked at him. How do you know about the necklace? Because I've seen that symbol before, Adrian said. And if I'm right about what it means, then you're not in as much danger from the people following you as you are from not knowing the truth. He paused. Show me. She lifted the chain over her head, placed it in his palm. He looked at it for a long moment. The compass rose. The arm that was slightly longer. The 2 initials intertwined, V and C Valenti and Caruso. 2 families, 2 names, 1 tragedy that everyone had agreed decades ago to stop discussing. He left the room and called Dominic from the hallway. I need you here, he said when his cousin picked up. Tonight. And I need you to pull everything we have on a woman named Amelia Carter. Greenpoint, last 5 years. Before that, I want to know what doesn't exist. What doesn't exist? Her history, before she was 15. I want you to find the place where her record stops. A pause on the line. Boss, who is this woman? Someone who survived something she doesn't remember surviving. Adrian paused. Dominic, when you come tonight, don't tell anyone. Another pause, longer this time. Understood, Dominic said. Adrian hung up, stood in the hallway, stared at the pendant in his hand. The compass rose spun slightly on its chain, catching the light turning, like something searching for north. He told Elena to bring breakfast, and to make sure Amelia ate all of it. Then he went to the basement. The basement of the Valenti estate was not what people imagined when they imagined a mafia basement. There were no chains, no drains. There was, instead, a room that Adrian's father had called the archive floor, to ceiling shelves of files, boxes, ledgers, and records going back 4 generations. Everything the Valenti family had ever done, every deal, every alliance, every conflict, every secret, stored in no particular order in a room that no one had cleaned since Carmine Valenti died 6 years ago. Adrian had not been in this room since the funeral. He went in now. He wasn't sure exactly what he was looking for. He only knew that the symbol on that pendant had come from somewhere, and that the somewhere was buried in this room, in the specific history of a conflict that had reshaped everything. Adrian's family had become a conflict from 30 years ago that had ended, officially, with a peace agreement between the Valentis and the Caruso family, and unofficially with a tragedy that both families had silently agreed to seal away. He found the first file an hour into searching. It was in a box marked 9294 Administrative, which was the kind of deliberately bland label that meant the opposite of what it said. The file inside was thin, only 7 pages, and it had no official header, no signatures, and no dates. But across the top of the first page, someone had written 4 words in his father's handwriting. The girl was hidden. Adrian sat down on the concrete floor with the file in his hands and read every word. By the time he was done, his hands were not entirely steady. Upstairs, Amelia had eaten half the breakfast Elena brought and was sitting on the edge of the bed fully dressed, clearly prepared to be told she needed to leave, and equally clearly unsure where she would go if that happened. When Adrian came back into the room, she looked at his face, and something in her own expression shifted. You found something, she said. I found a beginning. He sat in the same chair as before. Amelia, what do you know about your childhood? What I've always known. The words came out practiced, automatic. I grew up in a foster family in Connecticut. Average family. I aged out of the system at 18, moved to New York, got work. I've been here since. Before the foster family. She was quiet. There's nothing before, she said. My records start at 15. The social workers always said my early documents were damaged in a records office fire. There was no fire, Adrian said. The room became very still. There was no fire, he repeated. There was a man named Caruso and a man named Valenti, and between them, 30 years ago, there was an agreement to make a child disappear. Amelia stared at him. What child, she said. Her voice was barely audible. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. We don't know everything yet, he said carefully. But I know enough to tell you that someone in this city has been making sure you never found out who you are. And I know enough to tell you that the necklace around your throat does not belong to a nobody. He paused. Whoever that old woman was, the one who came to your apartment, she was telling you the truth. Your name is not your name. Amelia sat very still. Then what is my name, she said. I don't know yet, Adrian said. But I'm gonna find out. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her deciding something, could see the exact moment she decided. Why, she said. Why would you do that for me? You don't know me. And you don't, she stopped. Men like you don't help people like me without a reason. Men like me, he repeated quietly, not defensive, just registering it. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it. Don't be. He leaned back slightly. You're right that I don't do things without a reason. My reason is that I've been looking for what happened to this family's past for 6 years. And last night the answer walked into my arms. He paused. I made you a promise last night. You were unconscious. But I made it. What kind of promise? That I would find out who you really are. And that whoever tried to destroy your life would answer to me. He held her gaze. I keep my promises, Amelia. Even the ones the other person doesn't hear. She looked at him for a long time. Okay, she finally said. The word came out quiet and absolute, the way people say things when they've decided to stop running and start fighting. Okay, then tell me where to start. Start by telling me everything that woman said to you, Adrian said. Every single word. Because whoever she was, she died to bring you a message, and we are not going to waste it. Amelia closed her eyes, opened them, took a breath. And she began. The story came out in fragments at first, then in longer pieces, then in a flood that she clearly hadn't expected, because some of it was things she hadn't realized she remembered until she said them out loud. She talked about the woman's face. She talked about the way she said, I've been looking for you. Not like someone who had found what they wanted, but like someone who had found something they were terrified to touch. She talked about the warning, never trust the people who tell you your past doesn't matter. And the way the woman's eyes had kept moving to the window while she spoke, checking, scanning, counting seconds. She talked about the sound she heard when she was already running. The sound she refused to describe in any more detail than I ran, and I didn't stop. Adrian listened without interrupting. He was good at listening. Most people in his position were not, but Adrian had learned early that the most dangerous thing a powerful person could do was stop paying attention. By the time she finished, it was past noon. The rain outside had stopped. The garden was very bright, water still dripping from the rose bushes, and somewhere in the estate a clock was ticking. She said, one more thing, Amelia said. She had been holding it back. He'd felt it, the thing she wasn't saying. At the end, when she was already at the door, what did she say? Amelia looked at him. She said, tell him you found the necklace. He'll know what to do. A pause. She didn't tell me who him was. She didn't explain. She just, Amelia's voice dropped. She said it like she already knew I would find you. Like, this was always going to happen. Adrian looked at the pendant, which he had set on the bedside table between them. The compass rose, the one arm that was longer. Tell him. He'll know what to do. He picked up the pendant. He looked at it for a very long time. And in the silence of that room, with the clock ticking somewhere in the walls of his dead father's house, Adrian Valenti made a decision that would eventually cost him more than he was prepared to lose, and gain him more than he had ever known to want. Stay here, he said. You are safe here. No one comes to this house who doesn't have my direct permission, and the last person who tried to break that rule is no longer a consideration. He placed the pendant gently back on the table. Dominic comes tonight. We'll begin then. He stood. I'm not a good man, he said. I want you to understand that. I'm not the kind of person who does this because it's right. I'm doing this because that pendant means something to my family that I've never been able to solve." He paused. "But I promise you, whatever we find, I will not bury it again. Whatever your real name is, whatever they did to you, it will come out." Amelia said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years." He almost smiled. He didn't, but it was close. "Get some rest," he said. "Tonight, we start pulling apart a 30-year lie." He walked to the door. "Adrian," she said. He stopped. "The woman who came to my apartment," Amelia said. "She had a name. She told me at the very end, right before she went to the door." She looked at him steadily. "Her name was Rosa. She said to tell him Rosa finally kept her promise." The doorframe caught Adrian's hand. His knuckles went white against the wood. Because Rosa Carmine Valenti was his aunt. And Rosa Carmine Valenti had been buried in an empty casket 23 years ago, on the same September afternoon, when everyone, his father, his cousin, every person who had built the world Adrian now stood at the center of, had agreed, in silence, that whatever had happened to Rosa was better left forgotten. She was not forgotten. She had been alive, and she had spent 23 years searching for a girl whose name had been taken from her. Adrian stood very still in the doorway. "Rest," he said. His voice came out even. Years of practice. He walked out, closed the door behind him, and in the hallway, alone, the most powerful man in New York City pressed his back against the wall and stood there for a long time, breathing very carefully, while everything he thought he knew about his family's past began, quietly and irreversibly, to fall apart. Dominic Valenti arrived at 8:47 in the evening, which was 12 minutes earlier than Adrian had told him to come, because Dominic was always early when he was worried and always late when he wasn't. The fact that he was early told Adrian everything he needed to know about what his cousin had already found. He came alone. No driver, no escort. He pulled his own car up the private road and rang the front door like a man visiting family, because he was technically, though the Valenti estate had not felt like a family home in a very long time. Adrian met him in the study. Dominic was 41, 2 years older than Adrian, with the same dark hair and the same careful eyes that ran in the family eyes that had been trained, from childhood, to reveal nothing that was not intended to be revealed. He was carrying a slim folder. He set it on the desk between them, without being asked, and looked at his cousin, with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. "Tell me you found something," Adrian said. "I found a lot of things," Dominic said. "Most of them are things I don't understand. Some of them are things I'm not sure I want to understand." He sat down across from Adrian. "Who is she?" "That's what we're trying to determine. What I can tell you is what she isn't." Dominic opened the folder. Amelia Carter, 27. Social Security number issued in Connecticut when she was 15. Before that, nothing. No birth certificate that matches. No hospital record. No school enrollment. No immunization history. No trace in any system, public or private, before the age of 15, when a complete and entirely fabricated identity was created for her by someone who was very good at that kind of work. He paused. And I mean very good. The kind of good that costs money. The kind of good that requires access to government systems that most people, even people like us, don't have. Adrian was very still. Who has that kind of access? 3 types of people, Dominic said. Federal agencies. Old money with political connections. He looked up. Or old families with the right people in the right places. The word families landed in the room the way Dominic intended it to land. "There's more," Dominic said. "Tell me." "I ran the pendant symbol through our contacts in the records office, the private ones, not the city ones." The compass rose with the offset arm. "It's not decorative. It was a seal. Used by 2 families in this city between 1970 and 1995 to authenticate private agreements that were never supposed to be written down but needed to be verified." He held Adrian's gaze. "The Valentis and the Carusos, I know." Dominic went very quiet. "You already knew. I found the file this morning. In my father's archive." "Which file?" "The one that says the girl was hidden." Dominic sat back in his chair slowly. He said nothing for a long moment. Outside, something moved in the garden wind through the wet rose bushes. And for a second the sound was the only thing in the room. "Adrian," Dominic said carefully, "how much of this do you actually know?" "Enough to know I don't know nearly enough." Adrian stood. "Come with me. She should hear this directly." "You want her in the room?" It's her life, Dominic. She's been kept out of every room that mattered for 27 years. That ends tonight. Amelia was not resting when Elena showed them upstairs. She was sitting at the small desk in the corner of the guest room, with a piece of paper in front of her, writing things down, fragments, Adrian guessed. Things she remembered, things she was trying to organize into a shape that made sense. She looked up when the door opened. When she saw Dominic, something moved through her expression: caution, reassessment, the quick calculation of someone who had spent years reading rooms and deciding in seconds whether to stay or run. "This is Dominic," Adrian said. "He's family. He's been looking into your background." "Into me," she said. "For you," Adrian said. Dominic pulled up a chair. He had the folder open on his knee, but he didn't lead with it. He looked at her first, the way Adrian had noticed. He always looked at people he was assessing, taking them in as a full thing rather than a problem to be solved. "Your records were created when you were 15, Dominic said. Straight, clean, no preamble. Whoever made them knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a forger working out of a back room. This was someone with institutional access and a specific reason to make sure you had an identity that was completely clean, no connections, no past, no way for anyone to trace you back." He paused. "Which means someone wanted you invisible. And they had the resources to make it happen." Amelia set down her pen. "Who? We don't know yet," Dominic said. "But we know the symbol on your necklace. It belonged to two families, the Valentis and the Carusos." Amelia looked at Adrian. "We had a conflict," Adrian said. "A serious one. 30 years ago. It ended with an agreement. Part of that agreement involved—" He stopped, chose the next words carefully. "A child was taken out of harm's way, hidden, given a new life to protect them from what the conflict left behind. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight." "You think that child was me?" Amelia said. "The timeline fits," Dominic said. "The pendant fits. The gap in your records fits." He paused. "And a woman named Rosa came to your apartment 2 nights ago. Rosa, who has been officially dead for 23 years, came to find you and told you to find Adrian." He looked at her steadily. "That's not coincidence, Miss Carter. That's a plan. Someone built a plan a long time ago, and it's been sitting there waiting for the right moment to unfold." Amelia looked down at her hands. "She cried," Amelia said quietly. "When she came to my door, she looked at my face, and she started crying before she even said anything. I thought she had the wrong apartment." She stopped. "She didn't have the wrong apartment." "No," Adrian said. "She didn't. So she knew who I was. She knew who you were supposed to be," Adrian said. "Which is not the same thing as knowing who you are." Amelia looked up at him. Something about that distinction, the precision of it, the care of it, landed on her face in a way she wasn't ready for. Her jaw tightened. She looked away. "What do we do now?" she said. "We find the other half of the story," Adrian said. "The half that my father sealed in that archive, and the half that someone is still killing to protect. They worked through the night, not in the formal, methodical way of people who had systems, in the way of people who were pulling at threads, following each one as far as it went before reaching back for another." Dominic spread papers across the study desk. Adrian brought up the files from the archive. Amelia sat across from them and added what she knew: fragments and impressions, and the occasional specific detail that would suddenly make something in the documents click into place. She remembered more than she thought she did. That was the thing Adrian noticed first. She kept starting sentences with "I don't think I know this," but, and then saying something precise and verifiable that matched what was in the files. A name, a street, a color, the shape of a window in a house she claimed she'd never been inside. Around midnight, she said, "There was a garden. When I was very small, I used to sit in it with a woman who smelled like lavender. She used to sing something. I always thought it was a dream, because there was no garden in the Foster house in Connecticut." Adrian looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at the file open in front of him. "The Caruso family home," Dominic said slowly, "had a garden on the south side. It was known for the lavender." He looked up. "The woman who planted it was Elena Caruso. She was the wife of Marco Caruso, the head of the family." He paused. "She died in 1999, a year after the conflict ended." The room was very quiet. "What was her name?" Amelia asked. Her voice was careful, controlled in the way of someone who was holding something very fragile with both hands. "Her full name." Dominic checked the file. "Elena Rosa Caruso." He stopped, looked up. "Her middle name was Rosa." The piece fell. Not loudly, not with any drama. It fell the way the last piece of a puzzle always falls, quietly, exactly where it was always going to go, with the particular finality of something that cannot be undone. Rosa wasn't a stranger, Amelia said. Not a question. Working it through, Rosa was Elena Caruso's daughter, Adrian said. Which would make her my aunt, Amelia said. The word came out like something she hadn't meant to say yet. She pressed her hand flat on the table, looked at the documents, spread out in front of her all this evidence of a life she'd never been allowed to know, and breathed through it. "What's my name?" she said. "My actual name. It has to be in there somewhere." Adrian and Dominic looked at each other. Then Adrian picked up the thin file, the one with his father's handwriting across the top, and turned to the last page. He read it again, set it down in front of Amelia. She looked at the name written there. Read it once. Twice. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then say it. Sophia, Adrian said quietly. Sophia Caruso. The name changed something in the room. Not in a way anyone could point to. But the air was different, heavier, more specific. The way air gets in a place where something important has just become irreversible. Amelia Sophia sat with it for a moment. Then she stood up and walked to the window and stood there with her back to both of them, and Adrian let her have that. He did not follow, did not offer words. He understood the particular loneliness of discovering that the ground under your feet was never where you thought it was. Dominic leaned toward Adrian and lowered his voice. There's something else. In the file. Tell me. The conflict 30 years ago, the Valenti-Caruso agreement, it wasn't just about territory or business. Dominic's voice was very quiet. There was a marriage, a proposed union between the families, the Caruso daughter and a Valenti son, to seal the peace. Adrian looked at him. The Caruso daughter was 3 years old at the time, Dominic said. The agreement specified that when she came of age, the union would be formalized. He paused. Then she disappeared, and the agreement became irrelevant. Except it wasn't irrelevant, Adrian said slowly. No, Dominic met his eyes. Because if she's alive and if she's found, the agreement would still be binding. To the people who care about that kind of thing. He stopped. And there are people in this city who care very much about that kind of thing, Adrian. Old people. People who built their world on exactly those kinds of arrangements. Adrian's jaw tightened. Who knows she's here, he said. Only the people in this room, Dominic said. And Elena. Keep it that way. Amelia turned from the window. She had heard enough. Her eyes were dry. She had either already cried privately or decided she wasn't oking to, and the look on her face was something Adrian had not expected from a woman who had been running for 2 days on no sleep and no food. It was resolve. Tell me who's trying to keep this buried, she said. I want a name. We don't have one yet, Dominic said. Then let's get one. She came back to the table, sat down, picked up the file like she had the right to, which she did, because it was her life. What else is in here? Dominic looked at Adrian. Adrian nodded. They kept working. By 2 in the morning, they had 3 names. People who had been present at the 1993 agreement. People who had signed the document with the Compass Rose seal that arranged for the child to be hidden and given a new life. People who were still alive, still influential, and who had every reason to ensure that the child they'd hidden stayed hidden forever. 2 of the names meant nothing to Amelia. The third name hit Adrian like a fist to the sternum. He stared at it for a long time without speaking. Long enough that both Amelia and Dominic were watching him, waiting, reading the stillness in his body the way people read weather. Adrian, Dominic said quietly. Is that? Yes, Adrian said. Are you sure? It's his signature. I'd know it in my sleep. He set the paper down, pressed his fingers flat against it. He signed this agreement. He was present when the decision was made to hide her. He knew she was alive. Adrian looked up. He's known for 30 years. Who? Amelia said. Adrian looked at her. He said the name. And Dominic, who had known Adrian his entire life, who had seen him face things that would break most men without showing a single crack, watched his cousin say that name with the particular flatness of a person whose world has just shifted 3 feet to the left and who is not yet sure where the ground is. The name was Carmine Reyes, Adrian's godfather, the man who had stood beside him at his father's funeral, the man who had been his most trusted advisor for 15 years, the man who called on his birthday every year, without fail, and who had told him repeatedly, tenderly, in the voice of a man who genuinely loved the person he was deceiving, that the Caruso conflict was a dead issue, that there was nothing left to find, that some wounds healed better when they were left alone. He knew, Adrian said, not to anyone in the room, to the ceiling, to the walls, to the air. He knew every single time I asked him about the past. He sat across from me, and he answered my questions, and he looked me in the eye, and he knew. No one spoke. Amelia reached across the table and put her hand over Adrian's. It was not a romantic gesture. It was the gesture of someone who recognized the specific feeling of being betrayed by someone who was supposed to love you, who recognized it in another person's body the way you recognize a scar on someone's face. He looked down at her hand. He did not move his away. "Okay," he said after a moment. "Okay, what do we do?" she said. "We go to him," Adrian said. "We go to him and we look him in the face and we make him answer for it." He paused. "But not tonight. Tonight I need to think, and you need to sleep." "I'm not sure I can sleep," she said. "Try," he said. "Because tomorrow is going to be harder than today. And today was already the hardest day you've had in a while." She almost laughed. It came out as a breath, sharp and involuntary, not quite a laugh, but the skeleton of one. "Okay," she said. She stood, gathered the papers she'd been taking notes on. Then she looked at Dominic, who was watching her with the same carefully neutral expression he'd walked in with, except it wasn't neutral anymore, not entirely. There was something in it that Adrian recognized as respect. Dominic did not give that easily. "Thank you," she said to him, "for finding this. We haven't found everything yet," Dominic said. "I know," she said, "but thank you for starting." She left the room. They heard her footsteps on the stairs, then silence. Dominic looked at Adrian. "She's not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect? Someone who would fall apart." "She already fell apart," Adrian said. "She just did it privately, in the 2 days before she collapsed in the street." He picked up the file again. "She's been surviving alone for a very long time, Dominic. This is just the first time she's doing it with someone else in the room." Dominic was quiet for a moment. Then the agreement. The binding arrangement between the families. "You know what it means if she's really Sofia Caruso." "I know, and it means nothing," Adrian said flatly. "Whatever my father and whoever else signed 30 years ago, that is a piece of paper. It is not this woman's future. She will not be arranged into anything by a document that was made before she was old enough to speak. There are people who will disagree with that," Dominic said. "Let them, Adrian, let them disagree," Adrian said. His voice had the quality it sometimes had in rooms where things were being decided quiet, absolute, carrying the specific weight of a person who has stopped calculating and started committing. The people who made this agreement lied, to me, to her, to this entire family, for 30 years. Whatever authority they think that paper gives them, they used it up. All of it. Dominic studied him for a long moment. "Carmine is not going to respond well to being confronted," he said. "No," Adrian agreed, "he's not. And when he doesn't respond well, then we find out exactly how far he's willing to go to keep this buried." Adrian set the file down, looked at his cousin. "And then we make sure he understands that the answer to that question no longer matters. Because the truth is already out. He just doesn't know that yet." Dominic nodded slowly. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and picked up his car keys. "I'll be back by noon," he said. "I have a contact in the city records office, the real records office, not the one we use. I think I can get the original birth certificate. If it exists, she's entitled to it." "She is," Adrian said. And Dominic paused at the door. "Be careful with her." Adrian looked at him. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means what it means," Dominic said. "She came into your life in a very specific way, at a very specific moment, carrying a very specific piece of your family's history. That's a complicated thing. Be careful with it." A pause. "And be careful with her." He left. Adrian stood alone in the study. The papers spread across the desk. The pendant, which he had brought down from upstairs without realizing it, sitting at the edge of the desk where the lamplight caught the compass rose and made it glow faintly. He picked it up, the arm that was longer, the 2 initials. V and C, his family's name, her family's name. Pressed together into one symbol 30 years ago, when 2 men who were supposed to be enemies decided to make peace over the future of a child who would be kept from knowing anything about it. He held it for a moment. Then he set it down, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the house and thinking about a man who had sat at his table, eaten his food, offered him counsel for 15 years, and lied through every single minute of it. Carmine Reyes had a lot to answer for, and Adrian Valenti, for the first time in a long time, was angry enough to collect. In the morning, she found him in the kitchen. This surprised her. The kitchen of the Valenti estate was large and warm, and smelled permanently of the coffee that Elena made before anyone else was awake, and Adrian was standing at the counter, Coat off, sleeves rolled up, holding a mug and reading something on his phone with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who had slept and was now thinking clearly. He looked up when she came in. "You slept," he said. Not a question he could tell. She had. 4 hours, she said. "It's enough." She looked around. Elena was not yet in sight. The coffee is there," he said. "Cups are in the second cabinet." She poured herself a cup, came to stand at the counter, near him, not close, but in the same general space, the way two people stand when they've been working together through the night and have established, without discussing it, a certain shared language of proximity. "I've been thinking about Carmine Reyes," she said. "So have I. He knew where I was," she said. "Not just that I existed where I was. He must have. If he was one of the people who arranged for me to be hidden, he would have had access to where they put me, who I was given to, how my records were built." She looked at her coffee. "Which means for 27 years he had my address." Adrian was very still. "He could have found me any time," she said. "He didn't. He let me stay invisible." She looked up. "Why? If he wanted to keep the secret, why not? Why not do something more permanent? Why let me live and just hope I never figured it out?" It was a question Adrian had been sitting with since 2 in the morning. "Because killing you would have been a loose end," he said carefully. "You were hidden, yes. But you were hidden by agreement, a formal agreement with the Caruso family's remaining members. If you died, those members would have known the agreement had been broken. And the Carusos, even diminished, are not a family you want hunting you for a broken blood agreement." He paused. "Keeping you alive and invisible was the safer choice. As long as you stayed nobody, you were not a threat." "And then Rosa found me," Amelia said. "And then Rosa found you," Adrian confirmed. "And whatever Rosa knew, whatever she'd been carrying for 23 years, she decided she was done waiting." He set down his mug. "She must have known she was out of time. Coming to your apartment directly, that openly she was taking a risk she'd been afraid to take for decades. Something made her take it now." "She was sick," Amelia said quietly. "She looked sick. I didn't think about it at the time. I was too frightened. But she was thin. And she moved carefully, and she looked like someone who had made a decision, because they didn't have the luxury of waiting anymore." Adrian looked at her. "She came to you because she was dying." "I think so." Amelia's voice was soft. "She came because she was running out of time, and she decided that whatever risk she was taking was worth it if it meant I finally knew the truth." She paused. "She died for it. She literally died for it." She set her own cup down. "I don't want that to mean nothing." "It won't," Adrian said. "I promise you." She looked at him. In the morning light, she looked different from the woman who had collapsed in the rain, not less frightened. Exactly, but differently frightened. The fear she was carrying now had a shape to it. Named fear was different from unknown fear. Named fear you could face. "When do we go to Carmine?" she said. "Tomorrow," he said. "Today I want more information before we walk into that room. I want to know exactly how much he knows, and exactly what he's been doing to keep this buried, because I promise you, the moment he hears that someone is asking questions, he will start making decisions. And I want to be ahead of every single one of them." She nodded. "Then, what about the people who were chasing me? The men outside my building?" "I'm working on that," Adrian said. "I have people looking." He picked up his phone. "Whoever they were hired. They were too organized to be random. And they knew your schedule, which means someone with access to your routine sent them. Once we know who sent them, we'll know how Carmine has been managing you from a distance." She absorbed that. "He's been watching me," she said. Not horror, just the quiet, clear recognition of a fact she needed to accept. "For years, most likely," Adrian said. "And now he knows someone found me." "He will soon," Adrian said, "which is why we move quickly." He looked at her directly. "You're safe here, but safe is temporary. We need to turn this from a situation where they're hunting you into a situation where the truth is already out, because the only way to permanently stop people like Carmine Reyes is to make the secret not worth keeping anymore." Amelia was quiet. Then she said, "You really do know exactly how this world works." "I've lived in it my whole life," he said. There was something in his voice, not bitterness, exactly, but the particular tiredness of someone who had never been given the option of a different world. "It has its advantages." She looked at him for a moment. "Adrian," she said, "last night, when Dominic told you about the arrangement, the one between the families, the agreement that was supposed to..." She stopped. "Tried again. I heard what you said. After I left the room. The walls in this house are not very thick." He met her eyes. I heard what you said about what that document means, she said. About what you would or wouldn't allow it to mean. He waited. Thank you, she said simply. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you're a person, not an arrangement. Anyone who's forgotten that distinction is going to be reminded of it. She held his gaze. In another life, or perhaps later in this one, when things had settled and the ground was more solid, that moment might have been something different, might have had a name. But right now, in the morning light of the Valenti estate kitchen, with a 30-year conspiracy spread across the study desk and a man named Carmine Reyes, about to discover that his most carefully kept secret was already burning, it was simply two people looking at each other honestly. That was enough. That was in fact more than either of them had expected to find. And somewhere in the city, a phone was ringing in a room full of men who had just been told that a woman named Amelia Carter had been found and that she was not alone. The people who had built the lie were starting to move, and they were about to discover that the man standing between them and the woman they wanted to silence was not interested in negotiating. The phone call came at 10:43 in the morning, while Adrian was still in the study, reviewing the last of the archive files. His personal cell, the number that fewer than 12 people in the world possessed, vibrated once on the desk, and the name on the screen made his jaw tighten before he even picked it up. Carmen Reyes. He let it ring 3 times, long enough to compose himself, short enough not to signal anything. Carmine, he said. Adrian. The older man's voice was warm, the way it had always been warm-textured, with the particular affection of someone who had made a long practice of making you feel like the most important person in the room. 68 years old, Carmine Reyes, and he still had the voice of a man who could talk anyone into or out of anything. I heard something this morning that concerned me. I wanted to call you directly. What did you hear? That you had a visitor, a woman, someone brought to your estate 2 nights ago. A pause brief, perfectly calibrated. I'm calling because I care about you, Adrian. And because I want to make sure you're not being taken advantage of by someone who knows how to read a man's weaknesses. Adrian's hand tightened on the phone. He kept his voice completely even. I appreciate the concern, he said, but I'm careful about who comes into my house. You know that. I do know that, Carmine said, which is why this surprised me. Another pause. Who is she, Adrian? A woman who needed help, Adrian said. You know I occasionally help people. I know you do. The warmth in the voice shifted barely, almost imperceptibly, the way a room gets slightly colder before a storm. I just want to make sure this particular person's is who she says she is. And who does she say she is? Silence. 2 full seconds of it. I don't know, Carmine said. That's what concerns me. Then I'll look into it, Adrian said. Thank you for calling, Carmine. He hung up. He sat completely still for 30 seconds. Then he walked upstairs, knocked on the guest room door, and said through the wood, he already knows you're here. We moved the timeline up. We go today. Amelia opened the door. She had been awake. She was dressed, her notes organized on the desk, her hair pulled back. She looked at his face and didn't ask whether it was serious. How much time do we have, she said. Hours, Adrian said. Maybe less. He called me directly, which means he's not certain yet what I know. He's probing. But the fact that he called at all means someone in his network saw something my car, Marco, something. And he's been sitting on it since this morning, deciding whether to wait or act. And he decided to act, she said. He decided to test, Adrian corrected. There's a difference. He hasn't moved yet, because he's not sure what he's dealing with. If I'm just sheltering a stranger, that's manageable. If I've found the documents, he stopped. We need to get to him before he figures out which one it is. Amelia picked up her notes without being asked. Then, let's go. Dominic was already back. He had arrived 20 minutes before Carmine's call, carrying a single document in a sealed envelope, the original birth certificate, pulled from a state archive that had never been digitized, in a folder that someone had clearly tried to have destroyed and failed, because the records clerk who'd received the destruction order had been too lazy to follow through, and had simply misfiled it instead. Fate operated, sometimes, through bureaucratic incompetence. Dominic spread the certificate on the desk. All 3 of them looked at it. Sophia Elena Caruso, born October 14, 1997, mother Elena Rosa Caruso, father listed as unknown, though the space had been filled in and then deliberately obscured, not crossed out, but smudged, as though someone had pressed their thumb across the ink before it dried. Someone didn't want the father's name on record, Dominic said. Or someone added it later, and then changed their mind, Adrian said. He leaned closer. Can you get that restored, the obscured section? I already have someone working on it, Dominic said. 2 hours, maybe 3. Adrian looked at the date. October 14, 1997. Amelia Sophia was looking at the document with an expression he had come to recognize over the past 24 hours. The look of someone receiving information that their mind is processing faster than their emotions can follow. She was taking it in, filing it, holding the feeling of it at arm's length until there was time to actually feel it. That's my birthday, she said. October 14th. The Foster family always celebrated it. I always thought they'd just picked a date. She let out a breath. They didn't pick a date. No, Adrian said quietly. They didn't. She reached out and touched the edge of the document. Not the name, the edge. Like she wasn't ready to claim the name yet, but needed to touch something real. Okay, she said, let's go see Carmine Reyes. Carmine kept an office in a building on the Upper East Side that looked, from the outside, like a private members club, dark wood paneling visible through the ground floor windows, a brass nameplate that said nothing identifiable, a doorman who knew every face that belonged inside and had very quiet ways of managing the ones that didn't. Adrian walked past the doorman without breaking stride, because he had been coming to this building since he was 19 years old, and there was no version of this conversation where Carmine's people stopped him at the door. Dominic was 2 steps behind, Amelia was beside Adrian, and he had told her before they got out of the car, "Let me start it. You'll know when it's your moment." She had nodded. She understood the mechanics of a confrontation. She'd been in enough of her own. The elevator took them to the 4th floor. The assistant outside Carmine's office, a young man who had clearly been told to expect Adrian, because he stood up immediately, without being asked, said, "Mr. Reyes is expecting you," he asked. He looked at Amelia and Dominic. "He asked that you come alone." "I'm sure he did," Adrian said, and walked past him. He opened the door himself. Carmine Reyes was standing at the window when they came in, not sitting, not pretending to be doing paperwork, standing, which meant he had been watching the street and had seen the car pull up. He turned when the door opened, and his face did exactly what Adrian expected it to do. It registered Amelia, held for a fraction of a second, and then reassembled itself into the warm, unreadable expression he had worn for 68 years. But that fraction of a second was enough, because in that fraction of a second, the warmth in Carmine Reyes's eyes was replaced by something cold and specific, the look of a man who has just seen the thing he has spent 30 years making sure he would never have to see. Recognition. He recognized her. "Adrian," Carmine said. "You should have told me you were bringing guests. You should have told me a lot of things," Adrian said. He closed the door behind them, walked to the sitzer of the room and stopped. Did not sit. 30 years of things, as it turns out. Carmine's eyes moved to Amelia again. "I don't believe we've met." "You've never met her," Adrian said. "But you've known exactly where she was for 27 years. So let's skip the part where we pretend otherwise." The room went very still. Carmine looked at Adrian for a long moment. Something shifted in his posture, a small, almost imperceptible settling, like a man who has been holding his breath for a very long time and has just decided to let it out. "Where did you find the documents?" he said. "My father's archive." Carmine Valenti was a careful man. He was, Adrian said. Not careful enough. Carmine moved away from the window, sat down behind his desk slowly, deliberately, the way old men sit when they are deciding not to run. He looked at Amelia with an expression that Adrian could not entirely read, and for the first time since they had walked into this room, he spoke directly to her. "How much do you know?" he said. "Enough," Amelia said. Her voice was steady. Whatever fear she was carrying, she had put it somewhere it couldn't be heard. "Do you know who your father was?" The question hit the room like a stone, dropped into still water, everything rippled. Amelia looked at Adrian. He looked at Carmine. "Tell us," Adrian said. Carmine folded his hands on the desk. He looked like a man at a confession, not frightened, not defiant, but carrying the specific weight of someone who has been holding a secret so long that the holding of it has become its own kind of exhaustion. "Your father," Carmine said to Amelia, "was Marco Caruso, the head of the Caruso family, and the man who, in 1997, made the single most dangerous mistake of his life." "What mistake?" Amelia said. "He fell in love with the wrong woman," Carmine said, "and he had a daughter by her. And that daughter, you, was the proof that the Carusos and the fence had been betraying the peace between them from the very beginning." Adrian felt something cold move through him. What are you saying? Your mother, Carmine said to Amelia, was not simply Elena Caruso's daughter-in-law. She was. He stopped, chose his words. She had connections to this family, Adrian. To your family. Connections that, if they had become public, would have destroyed both the Valentis and the Carusos simultaneously. Marco Caruso knew this. He used it. He used the relationship as leverage, and when the child was born, he intended to use the child as well. So you hid her, Amelia said. Her voice was very quiet. You hid me to protect both families from the truth. We hid you to protect you, Carmen said, and for the first time, his voice cracked not much, barely, a hairline fracture in 68 years of control. Marco Caruso was not a good man. He was not going to protect you. He was going to use you, and your mother was already gone by the time you were 2 years old. Gone, Amelia repeated. She died, Carmen said. I'm sorry. I'm telling you the way I would tell you if I had any right to ask for your forgiveness. She died in the spring of 2000, and Marco Caruso did not grieve her for a single day. The silence after that was immense. Amelia stood inside it. She was breathing carefully, evenly, the way people breathe when they are choosing whether to fall apart or stay standing. Adrian watched her make the choice, watched her stay standing. You took me from my father, she said finally. A man you say was dangerous. Yes, and you gave me to strangers. We gave you to safety, Carmine said. I understand those are not the same thing. I have understood that for 27 years. Then why didn't you come back for me, she said, when it was safe? When Marco Caruso was gone, when whatever threat you were protecting me from was gone. Why didn't you come back? Carmine was quiet for a moment. Because by then, he said slowly, you had a life. A small life, a quiet life. Nothing like what you were born to, but it was yours. And I told myself, he stopped. I told myself that bringing you back would do more harm than good. You told yourself it was easier, Amelia said. Not anger, clarity. You told yourself it was easier than undoing what you'd done. Carmine did not answer, because the answer was yes. Adrian had been listening to all of this, with the controlled stillness he used, in rooms where things were being decided. But there was something building in him, something that was not yet anger but was becoming it. And it had less to do with Amelia's story, and more to do with the specific fact of a man he had trusted, completely, for 15 years, sitting behind a desk, and talking about the weight of a secret he'd never once offered to share. Rosa came to find her, Adrian said. Carmine closed his eyes briefly. I know, you knew Rosa was alive, yes, and you let everyone believe she was dead. My father's sister, my family. For 23 years, Carmine. Rosa made that choice herself, Carmine said. After she found out what Marco had done to the girl's mother, she couldn't come back to a world that had agreed to protect Marco Caruso's secrets. So she disappeared. He looked at Adrian directly. I did not put her in that coffin. She chose it. You chose not to tell me she was alive, Adrian said. Every year, every conversation, every time I asked about the past and you told me there was nothing left to find. He paused. You chose that, Carmine, every single time. Carmine held his gaze. Yes, he said, I did. The admission landed in the room with the particular weight of something that cannot be taken back. I was protecting this family, Carmine said. Both families. The truth about your mother's connections to the Carusos, Adrian, if that had come out, it would have ended everything your father built. It would have made him look like a traitor to his own people. My mother, Adrian said slowly. Something was shifting in his chest, something he hadn't expected, hadn't prepared for. My mother had connections to the Carusos. Your mother and Elena Caruso were friends, Carmen said. Close friends. Long before either of them married the men they married. And when the conflict began, your mother, he stopped. Your mother tried to stop it. She went to Elena directly. She proposed a private peace between the two women before the men had even sat down to negotiate. Adrian stared at him. You're telling me my mother was involved in all of this. I'm telling you, your mother was the reason any kind of peace was possible, Carmine said. And I'm telling you that Marco Caruso used that friendship and that history to maneuver your family into an agreement that benefited him far more than it benefited you. He looked at Amelia. And I'm telling you that the child sitting in this room today is the living proof of a relationship between families that was far more complicated than anyone has ever been allowed to know. The room was very quiet. Then Amelia said, What was my mother's name? Carmen looked at her. Her name was Lucia, he said. Lucia Caruso, born Elena and Marco's eldest daughter. Marco's own daughter, he paused. Your father, Marco Caruso, had a child with his own daughter. The air went out of the room. Adrian heard Dominic behind him draw a sharp breath. Amelia did not move, did not speak. She went very still in the way of someone whose mind has just received something that the body needs a moment to catch up with, not falling apart, not breaking, just completely, absolutely still. Then she turned and walked to the window. She stood there with her back to the room. Adrian looked at Carmine Reyes, at the man who had carried this specific secret for nearly 30 years, who had stood beside him at his father's funeral and at his mother's birthday dinner and at 100 tables and meetings and moments, carrying all of this, saying nothing. "Get out of this city," Adrian said. His voice was very quiet. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Because when this comes out, and it will come out, you don't want to be in a room where people are deciding what to do about the choices you made." "Adrian, I'm not finished," Adrian said. "You told yourself you were protecting people. Maybe some part of that is true, but you protected yourself too. Your position, your relationship with both families, your relevance." He held the older man's gaze. "You let a child grow up alone because undoing what you'd done was inconvenient. Don't dress that up as sacrifice." Carmine said nothing. "The documents we have," Adrian continued. "The birth certificate, the archive files. Dominic has copies in 3 separate locations. If anything happens to Amelia, to any of us, those copies go to every contact we have in this city and outside it. Every journalist, every rival family, every federal contact who has ever owed us a conversation." He paused. "So whatever you're thinking about managing this situation, stop thinking it." Carmine looked at him for a long moment. "You've changed," the older man said quietly. "No," Adrian said, "I've just stopped being managed." He turned to Amelia. She had turned back from the window. Her eyes were dry, but her face carried something, not devastation, which was what he'd expected, but something closer to a terrible, hard-won clarity. The look of someone who has just been handed the worst possible answer to a question and has decided that having the answer, no matter how ugly, is better than not having it. "Are you all right?" he said. He knew it was an inadequate question. "No," she said, "but I will be." She looked at Carmine one more time, a long, level look that the older man did not look away from, because whatever he was, he had the dignity not to. "I'm not going to pretend I understand any of this yet," she said to him. "I'm not going to pretend I forgive you, but I need you to answer one question." "If I can," Carmine said. "Rosa," Amelia said. "When she came to find me, she knew she was dying. She took a risk she'd been afraid to take for decades. Did you know she was going to do it? Did you know she was going to find me?" Carmine was quiet for a long moment. "She called me," he said, 3 weeks ago. "She told me she was going to find you. She told me that whatever I believed about protecting you, she had decided that you had the right to know the truth before she died." He paused. "I told her not to. I told her it would open things that couldn't be closed again." "And," Amelia said, "and she told me," Carmine said quietly, "that some things should not be closed. That some things should be opened, even if it hurts, because the alternative is letting a person live their whole life as a lie." He folded his hands on the desk. "She said the girl deserves to know who she is, even if knowing costs something." The room was silent. "She was right," Amelia said. "Yes," Carmine said. "She was." Adrian touched Amelia's arm lightly, briefly, the way you touch someone when you are checking that they are still standing. "She was." "We're leaving," he said to Carmine. "Don't make me come back." They walked out, down the elevator, through the lobby, past the doorman, and into the cold outside air, where the city moved around them with the complete indifference of a place that never stops for anyone's crisis. Amelia stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she said, "I need a minute." "Take it," Adrian said. Dominic walked to the car. Adrian stood beside her on the sidewalk, not speaking, not moving, just present, because sometimes that was the only thing that could be offered, and the only thing that helped. After a moment she said, "My whole life, every question I ever had about where I came from, every time I looked in the mirror and thought I didn't look like anyone, every time I felt like I was living inside someone else's story." She stopped, took a breath. "It turns out I literally was." "Yes," he said. "And the woman who finally told me the truth died for it." "Yes." She was quiet for another moment. "The men who were chasing me," she said. "It wasn't Carmine, was it? He said he chose not to act against me. But someone else. Someone else decided that Rosa finding you was a threat they couldn't manage," Adrian said. He had been thinking about this since they walked out of the elevator. "Someone who found out Rosa had contacted you before Carmine did. Someone who didn't have Carmine's reasons for keeping you alive. He looked at her. We need to find out who knew about Rosa's call before Carmine did, because that's who sent the men to your apartment. Amelia looked at him. Someone was watching Rosa. Or listening, Adrian said. Or both. His phone buzzed. Dominic, from the car. He read the message. He looked up at Amelia with an expression she was already learning to read, the specific stillness that meant something had changed, and he was deciding how to say it. What? She said. Dominic's contact finished the restoration, he said. The obscured section on the birth certificate. The father's name. I already know the father's name, she said. We just heard it. We heard who your father was, Adrian said. But the name that was written on that certificate and then obscured. He paused. It isn't Marco Caruso's name. Amelia stared at him. What? The name on the certificate, Adrian said carefully, is Carmine Reyes. The world stopped. Amelia's face went completely blank, not empty, but overloaded, the way a screen goes white when it receives too much input at once. She looked at him, looked at the phone in his hand, looked back at him. He lied, she said. About one more thing, Adrian said. Yes, she turned and looked back at the building they had just walked out of. At the fourth-floor window, where a 68-year-old man was, at this moment, sitting behind his desk and knowing with certainty, now that the last piece of the truth had finally caught up with him. He's not just the man who hid me, Amelia said slowly. No, Adrian said. He's my father. The word landed on the sidewalk between them, like something dropped from a great height. Adrian said nothing. There was nothing to say. Some truths needed a moment to simply exist before anyone tried to put words around them. Amelia stood on the sidewalk of the Upper East Side, in the middle of a city that had spent 27 years pretending she didn't exist, and breathed. In, out, in, out. Then she straightened her spine, squared her shoulders, and looked at Adrian Valenti with eyes that had seen, in the last 48 hours, more truth than most people see in a lifetime, and were still open, still clear. We're going back inside, she said. Yes, he said. And this time, she said, I'm asking the questions. She walked back toward the door, and Adrian Valenti, a man who had not followed anyone's lead in 15 years, fell into step beside her without a moment's hesitation. The call came at 11:43 in the morning, before Dominic had even made it back from the city records office. Adrian saw the name on his phone screen and felt something cold move through his chest, not fear, because fear was not something Adrian Valenti did in the conventional sense, but something adjacent to it. The particular sensation of a man who has spent years being careful, suddenly realizing that careful was no longer enough. Carmine Reyes was calling him. Adrian let it ring twice. Then he picked up. Carmine, he said. His voice was exactly what it always was, measured, warm, the voice of a man receiving a call from his godfather on an ordinary Tuesday. Adrian. Carmine's voice was 81 years old, and still carried the texture of a man who had never once in his life been uncertain of his own authority. Deep, unhurried, the kind of voice that had delivered verdicts and ultimatums with equal composure for 6 decades. I hear you had an eventful night. Adrian said nothing. He let the silence sit. A young woman, Carmine continued, found in the industrial district, brought to your house, a pause, delicate as a blade. That's unusual for you, Adrian. You're not generally a man who picks up strays. She needed help, Adrian said. Of course she did. The warmth in Carmine's voice was the specific warmth of a man who had practiced it until it was indistinguishable from the real thing. That's what concerns me. People in distress, in your part of the city, at that hour they're rarely what they appear to be. I'd hate for someone to take advantage of your generosity. I'll keep that in mind, Adrian said. Have breakfast with me, Carmine said. Tomorrow morning, my house. We can talk properly. Of course, Adrian said. I'll be there. He hung up, set the phone down on the desk, stood very still for a moment. Then he walked upstairs and knocked on the guest room door. He knows you're here, he said when Amelia opened it. She didn't flinch. She absorbed it the way she'd been absorbing bad news for 2 days completely. Without drama, with the quiet steadiness of someone who had stopped being surprised by the world's capacity for threat. How, she said. He has people, Adrian said, same as I do. Someone saw something, or someone talked. He looked at her. He called me. Friendly, casual. He wants me at his house tomorrow for breakfast. Are you going? Yes, Adrian, I'm going, he said. But not the way he expects. He paused. I need you to trust me for the next 24 hours. Completely. Can you do that? She studied him. The wariness was still there. It would probably always be there, built into her by years of surviving on it. But underneath it, something had shifted since the first night. Something had been decided. Yes, she said. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. Dominic returned at 1:15 with two things: a document case and a look on his face that Adrian had only seen a handful of times in their shared lives. It was the look Dominic got when he had found something that reorganized the entire shape of a problem. He set the document case on the desk, opened it. Inside was a birth certificate. Original, not a copy of the paper aged to the particular yellow of official documents, kept in storage for 27 years, the ink slightly faded at the edges. The seal embossed in the lower left corner, with a stamp that predated the current city record system. Sofia Elena Caruso, born March 14, 1997, father Giovanni Caruso, mother Maria Caruso ne Valenti. Adrian read it twice. Then he read the mother's name again, Maria Caruso ne Valenti. He looked at Dominic. Her mother was a Valenti, Dominic said quietly. Not just a Caruso hidden from the conflict, both. She's both families, Adrian. Giovanni Caruso married Maria Valenti, your father's younger sister, in 1994. 3 years before Sofia was born. He paused. The conflict wasn't just between the families. It was inside the families. Your own aunt married into the Carusos. And when everything collapsed in 97 and 98, when the violence got bad enough that people started disappearing. They had a daughter, Adrian said, who was 2 years old when her parents were killed, Dominic said, and who was taken by Rosa Maria's older cousin on the Caruso side and hidden, because she was the living proof that the two families had been more entangled than anyone admitted, and that proof was dangerous to a lot of people who had been selling the narrative of clean separation. The room was absolutely silent. Amelia was standing at the edge of the desk. She had been reading along with Adrian, following Dominic's words with the focused intensity of someone absorbing information that was simultaneously her own history and something she had no personal memory of living. She reached out and touched the birth certificate with 2 fingers, very gently, as if it might dissolve. My parents were killed, she said. It wasn't a question, it was someone saying a fact out loud for the first time, so they could hear what it sounded like. We believe so, Dominic said. We don't have confirmation yet. But the timing. They were killed because of the conflict, she said. And then I was hidden, because I was evidence that the conflict was more complicated than the story people were telling. Yes, she lifted her fingers from the paper, looked at Adrian. Your aunt, she said. Maria Valenti was your aunt. My father's youngest sister, Adrian said. She died when I was 12. That's the official version. Car accident, 1997. No body recovered. He stopped. There was no car accident. There was a conflict. And there was a marriage that the wrong people found out about. And there was a child who survived it. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. Then she stopped. Family, Adrian said quietly, in a manner of speaking. By blood, if not by name. Something moved through her face that was too complex to name. Not quite grief, not quite relief, something that lived in the space between two things that should have been opposites, but somehow weren't. She pressed her lips together, looked down at the birth certificate again. Carmen knew this, she said. All of it. He signed the agreement that hid you, Adrian said. He knew your parents. He knew your mother was a Valenti. He was there for every piece of this. Then why? She looked up sharply. Why would he hide me specifically? What did hiding me protect him from? The question landed in the room like a stone, dropping into still water. Dominic and Adrian looked at each other. It was the right question. It was, in fact, the exact right question, and it was one neither of them had a complete answer to yet. That, Adrian said, is what tomorrow's breakfast is going to tell us. That night, Adrian told Amelia things he had not planned to tell her. It happened gradually, the way things did in houses late at night, when two people had been in close proximity for long enough that the normal social architecture started to loosen. Elena had gone to bed. Dominic had left. The estate was quiet in the way of large houses that have absorbed decades of living, a quiet that had texture, that breathed. They were in the study, going back through the archive files one more time, looking for anything that connected Carmine Reyes, specifically to the decisions made in 1997 and 1998. And somewhere between the third file and the fourth, Amelia had said, not as a question, just as an observation, you've spent a long time on this. On your family's past, this isn't new for you. And Adrian had told her the truth. He told her about his father, a man who was brilliant and ruthless and deeply private, who had built the Valenti organization from a regional operation into something that controlled 3 of the city's most significant channels of influence, and who had died 6 years ago of a heart attack at the age of 67, 2 weeks after Adrian had asked him, directly, whether everything that had happened in the late 1990s had been dealt with properly. His father had said yes. His father had been lying. He knew, Adrian said. Not with anger anymore that had burned itself out somewhere in the small hours of the previous night. What was left was something quieter, and, in its own way, more painful. He knew that my aunt had married Giovanni Caruso. He knew there was a child. He signed the same agreement Carmine signed. He spent the last 30 years of his life making sure I never found the piece of our family history that might have told me we weren't who I thought we were. Why does that matter so much to you? Amelia asked. Carefully, not challenging, genuinely asking. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Because I've spent 15 years running an organization that I believed was built on a specific set of rules, he said. My father had rules. They weren't clean rules. This isn't a clean world. But they were consistent. You didn't touch families. You didn't hide things from your own blood. You didn't sacrifice people for convenience. He paused. Except he did. He sacrificed his own sister. He let her marriage be erased. Let her death be called an accident. Let her daughter disappear into a fake identity in Connecticut. And he kept running his organization with his rules and his principles like none of it had happened. Amelia listened. The worst part, Adrian said, is that I don't think he did it for power. I think he did it because he was afraid. A Valenti woman, married into the Carusos, that was the kind of thing that could destabilize everything he'd built. The kind of thing that enemies could use to question his control, his decisions, his authority. So he buried it, and then he lived with it. He looked at his hands. And apparently so did Carmine. But Carmine is still running from it, Amelia said. Your father is gone. The men who built this secret are mostly gone. But Carmine is still sending people to follow me. Still calling you the morning after I arrive. Still. She stopped. What is he still afraid of? The question again. The same question, circling back. You, Adrian said simply. You're the proof. You're the living document of everything they agreed to prevent didn't happen. As long as you exist, and as long as you know what you know, the entire constructed history they built is fragile. He looked at her. And the thing about men like Carmine is that they've spent their whole lives building walls around their secrets. When those walls start to crack, they don't look for another way. They look for a way to make the crack disappear. Amelia said nothing for a moment. Then he's not going to stop. Not until he believes he has no other choice, Adrian said. And tomorrow, Adrian said, I'm going to make him believe that. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that it would have been uncomfortable between two people who hadn't already crossed enough of those invisible lines to have stopped keeping count. Adrian, she said, whatever happens tomorrow, I want to be there. Amelia Sophia, she said, quietly. It was the first time she'd used that name to refer to herself, and they both heard it. And I want to be there. He spent 27 years making decisions about my life, without my knowledge or my consent. I'm done being absent from rooms where my life gets decided. He looked at her. He thought about telling her no. He ran through the reasons: security, exposure, the unpredictable nature of Carmine's reaction when cornered. He ran through all of them, and he looked at her face, and he understood, with the particular clarity of someone who had spent his whole life making unilateral decisions about other people's lives, that he did not have the right to make this one. Fine, he said. You're there, but you follow my lead. Every step. Agreed, she said immediately. And you say nothing until I say it's time. Agreed. And if I tell you to leave the room, you leave. She paused. Agreed, she said, with slightly less conviction on that one. He almost smiled again. Carmine Reyes's home was in the old part of the city, a townhouse that had been in his family for 50 years. 4 stories of dark brick and high windows that looked out over a street that had been expensive for so long it had become invisible to itself. The kind of neighborhood where no one called the police, because the police understood, without being told, that calling the police was not what happened here. Adrian arrived at 9 in the morning, on time. He brought Dominic. He brought Amelia, dressed in clothes Elena had found for her, simple, dark, nothing that announced itself, and he walked through Carmen's front door with the specific calm of a man who had decided what he was going to do before he left the house. Carmine was in the dining room. He was 81 years old, still physically imposing in the way of men whose bodies had been built for authority, and whose minds had kept them vital long past the age when most people softened. White-haired, dark-eyed, impeccably dressed in a way that was not for anyone else's benefit, but simply how he had always been. He rose when Adrian entered the courtesy of a man who believed in form, and then he saw the two people behind Adrian, and something happened in his face. Not surprise, it was too controlled for surprise. Recognition. He looked at Amelia the way Adrian had looked at the pendant in the rain, with the sudden arrest of a man who has seen something he thought was safely buried, walking through his door. Adrian, Carmine said, still warm, in the practiced way. I wasn't expecting company. This is Sophia Caruso, Adrian said. I think you know who she is. The room became very still. Carmine did not move. He looked at Amelia, at Sophia, with an expression that was doing an enormous amount of work. Something struggled behind his eyes, not guilt, exactly. Not remorse. Something older and more complicated than either of those things. Something that looked almost like grief. Sit down, he said. His voice had changed, not much, but enough. They sat. Carmine remained standing for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he sat as well, slowly, the way old men sat when they were not simply resting their body but surrendering something. You found her, he said to Adrian, not accusatory. Almost relieved. She found me, Adrian said. Rosa sent her. Something cracked open in Carmine's face. Brief a second, maybe less before the control came back. But Adrian had been watching for it. Rosa, Carmine said. She came to Amelia's apartment 2 nights ago, Adrian said. She was dying. She used the last of whatever time she had to find Sophia and send her to me. Carmine said nothing. She told Sophia to find me, Adrian continued. She said, tell him you found the necklace. He'll know what to do. She trusted me, Carmine. Rosa trusted me with this, which is more than she trusted you. The last sentence landed with precision. Carmine's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Rosa was. He stopped. Start again. Rosa was supposed to stay hidden. It was the only way to keep her safe. She hid for 23 years, Amelia said. It was the first time she had spoken in the room, and the effect was immediate. Carmine looked at her, as if he'd almost forgotten she was a real person, and not simply a problem to be managed, and the look on her face steady, direct, carrying the particular authority of someone who has been silent for long enough, clearly did something to him that Adrian's controlled interrogation had not. She hid for 23 years, Amelia repeated, and then she came out of hiding because she was dying, and she decided the truth mattered more than her safety. She was killed for it, for coming to tell me who I was. She held Carmine's eyes. What were you afraid of? What is so important that it was worth her life? Carmine looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Adrian. You've seen the files, he said. All of them, Adrian said, including the one from my father's archive, the one that says the girl was hidden. Then you know why. I know the surface of why, Adrian said. I want the rest. Carmine was quiet for so long that the silence started to have a shape. He reached into his jacket and produced something Adrian had not expected, a small keyhole, the kind that opened a lockbox or a deposit drawer. He set it on the table between them. There is a box, he said, in a bank on 53rd Street. In your father's name. It has been sitting there for 22 years waiting. He looked at Adrian. He told me your father told me that if you ever found the girl, I was to give you this key. He said you would know what to do with it. The air in the room shifted completely. Adrian stared at the key. He knew I would find her, Adrian said. He believed you would, Carmine said. Eventually. He said. The old man's voice changed, roughened. He said you were the only one of us who would actually do something right with the truth. He said the rest of us were too afraid of what it cost. He paused. He was ashamed, Adrian. He spent the last years of his life ashamed of what he'd done. But he was not, he could not. Carmine stopped, pressed his lips together. He couldn't undo it himself, so he left the key, and he waited for you to be ready to open the box. Adrian said nothing. The key sat on the table between them. It was small, brass, unremarkable. It was the most significant object in the room. What's in the box? Amelia asked. Everything, Carmine said. He sounded, for the first time, genuinely old. Everything that happened. Everything that was decided. The names of everyone involved. The documentation of how your identity was created and why. The real account of what happened to your parents. He looked at her. And the names of the people who gave the order. Amelia went very still. What people? Adrian said sharply. Carmine looked at him. Not me, the old man said. Not your father. We were complicit. I will not pretend otherwise, and I will not sit here and ask forgiveness I do not deserve. But the order to kill Giovanni and Maria Caruso did not come from either of us. Adrian leaned forward. Then who opened the box? Carmen said. Let the documents speak. I am done speaking for other people's decisions. He looked at Amelia one more time. There was something in his face that had not been there before, something that had cracked open when she'd said Rosa's name and had not fully closed again. Your mother, he said quietly, Maria. She was the bravest person I knew. She married for love in a world that didn't believe in love. She had you knowing the risk it represented. She kept you alive for 2 years in a situation that was getting more dangerous every month. He paused. She made Rosa promise to find you if anything happened. Rosa kept that promise. It just took 23 years. Amelia was silent. Her eyes were bright. She was not going to cry in front of this man. Adrian could see the decision in the set of her jaw, but it was costing her something. Thank you, she said. Her voice was completely even. For telling me that. Carmine nodded once. Adrian picked up the key. We're leaving, he said. He looked at Carmine with the particular expression that he reserved for situations where everything important had already been decided, and what remained was only the implementation. You're going to stay available. You're not going to contact anyone about this conversation. You're not going to warn anyone. And you are going to be prepared when the time comes to put everything you know on record. Carmine looked at him. And if I don't, then I will do this without you, Adrian said. And the people whose names are in that box will be very unhappy to learn that the one person who might have helped them is the reason their protection failed. He stood. Either way, Carmine, this ends. The only question is which side you want to be on when it does. The old man was quiet for a long moment. I'm already on the wrong side, he said. I've been on the wrong side for 30 years. But I'm tired of it. He looked at his hands. I'll be available. Adrian nodded, moved toward the door. Dominic was already standing. Amelia paused. She turned back to Carmine one more time. The men who followed me, she said. The ones who were sent to my building. Were those yours? Carmine shook his head. No, I knew where you were. I did not send anyone. Then open the box, he said. There's a name in there. A name that will make sense of all of it. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned and followed Adrian out the door. The bank was on 53rd Street, as Carmine had said. The box was in the vault under a name that the bank manager recognized. With a slight widening of the eyes, Carmine Valenti left a paper trail that predated the current branch manager's birth, and he showed them to the private viewing room without asking questions, because people with access to boxes like this one did not answer questions, and the branch manager understood his job. Adrian put the key in the lock. He looked at Amelia. She nodded. He turned the key. The box was full. Not chaotically, with the specific organization of a man who had known this box might be opened by someone who needed to understand quickly and completely. Folders labeled, documents dated, photographs annotated in a hand Adrian recognized as his father's. He reached in and took out the top folder. He opened it. The first page was a letter, handwritten, addressed to no one specifically but clearly intended for whoever opened the box. It began, I did not have the courage to say this while I was alive. I'm saying it now because my son will find the girl, and when he does, he deserves to know who we really were. Adrian read the letter. He read it in the kind of silence that is not silence, but rather the absence of anything except the words on the page. Dominic stood near the door. Amelia stood beside Adrian, reading along with him, and he did not move away or angle the paper because it was her story too, and she had the right to read every word of it at the same moment he did. The letter named the people who had ordered the deaths of Giovanni and Maria Caruso. It named 2 men. One was dead, had been dead for 8 years. The other was very much alive. Was, in fact, one of the most prominent figures in the city's legitimate business community. Was the kind of man whose name appeared on the boards of hospitals and universities and cultural institutions. Was the kind of man whose public life was so carefully constructed that no one who saw him at a charity gala would ever think to look at what was behind the wall. Adrian read the name. He turned the page, read the documentation, the evidence his father had spent years quietly collecting, building a case he'd never had the courage to use. He read it all. Then he set the folder down on the table and stood very still for a moment. Amelia was still reading. He let her finish. He watched her face as she got to the name, watched the moment she connected it to something, recognized something, and then went completely, unnervingly still. You know him, Adrian said. She looked up. He came into the diner, she said. Her voice was absolutely flat. 3 months ago, He came in with 2 other men and sat in my section. He was very charming. He tipped well." She stopped. "He asked me my name. The room was very quiet. He saw me," she said. "He sat in my section, and he looked at my face and he asked me my name." She looked at Adrian. "He was checking. He already knew where I was, and he was checking in person, whether I knew who I was." "And you didn't," Adrian said. "I didn't. I was just a waitress with a forgettable name and a normal life." And she stopped. "He decided I was safe. He walked out of that diner and decided I wasn't a threat." Her jaw tightened. "And then Rosa came to my door. And suddenly you were," Adrian said. She put her hand down flat on the table. The same gesture as before, the steadying gesture, the one she made when the ground moved. But this time, when she lifted her hand, her expression had changed completely. She was done being afraid. He could see it happen. Could see the exact moment when the fear that had been running her for 2 days finished burning through and left behind something harder and cleaner and considerably more dangerous. "He sent the men to my building," she said. "After Rosa came. He knew she'd found me because he'd had Rosa watched for years. And the moment Rosa moved, he moved." "Yes," Adrian said. "He wants to make sure I disappear again." "Yes." She looked at him. "I'm not disappearing again," she said. "No," Adrian said. "You're not." He picked up the folder, looked at the name on the document one more time. Victor Harland, 67 years old. Real estate developer, philanthropist, board member of the city's most prestigious institutions, and the man who had ordered the deaths of 2 people 27 years ago to protect a business arrangement that a love match had complicated beyond his tolerance. "We need to move fast," Dominic said from the door. He had been quiet through all of it, reading his own documents from the box. If Harland has been watching, and he knows Carmine had a conversation this morning that he wasn't part of, he's going to start making contingency decisions. "He's going to come for her again," Adrian said. "Before we can go public with this." Adrian looked at Amelia. "I need to make some calls," he said. "People I trust in the city's official channels. People who can receive this documentation in a way that makes it impossible to bury." He held her eyes. "Once I make those calls, this is moving, and it does not stop. Harland will know. He will react." "Make the calls," she said. "Amelia, Sophia," she said, firm this time, decided. "My name is Sophia. And yes, make the calls, all of them." He looked at her for one more moment. Then he took out his phone. And for the first time in 30 years, the truth that a powerful man had paid to keep buried began, quietly and irreversibly, and with the particular force of something that has been compressed for too long, to move toward the surface. Victor Harland's phone was going to ring before nightfall. And the call was not going to be from anyone he expected. The morning Victor Harland was arrested, Sophia Caruso was sitting in Adrian's kitchen drinking coffee she hadn't touched. She had been awake since 4. Not from fear, fear had a different texture now, something she recognized and could name and therefore manage, like an old injury that ached in cold weather but no longer stopped her from moving. What had kept her awake was something else entirely. Something quieter and more permanent. The specific wakefulness of a person who is standing at the edge of the last day of one version of their life, looking out at everything that comes after. The coffee went cold. She didn't notice. Adrian came downstairs at 5:47. He saw her at the table. He saw the untouched cup. He went to the counter, poured fresh coffee into a new cup, set it in front of her without comment, and sat down across from her with his own. They sat in silence for a while. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that had developed slowly over the 2 weeks since the bank vault, since the calls, since the machinery of consequence had begun moving with the particular momentum of something that could not be direct and would not be redirected. The kind of silence that only existed between people who had been through enough together that words were no longer the primary language. "Today," she said finally. "Today," he confirmed. She wrapped both hands around the fresh cup. "Dominic called you last night, at midnight, and Harland's legal team filed 3 emergency injunctions yesterday afternoon," Adrian said. "All 3 were denied by 9 p.m. The documents from the box, the full record, are in the hands of 4 separate journalists, 2 federal prosecutors, and a judge who has been waiting for something exactly like this for 6 years. He paused. "There is no wall left to hide behind. Every move he makes now only adds to the evidence." Sophia was quiet. "He's going to say it was all my father," she said. "He's going to say the Valentis were behind it, and he was peripheral." "He's already saying that," Adrian said. "It won't work. My father's letter specifically names Harland as the one who gave the order. Carmine has agreed to testify, and the documentation covers every transaction, every decision, every communication between Harland and the people he used to manage the situation for 30 years. He looked at her steadily. He has no room, none. She nodded slowly. How are you? She said. The question surprised him, the way it always did when she turned it around. He was not a man people asked that question to, not sincerely, not expecting a real answer. I'm fine, he said. She looked at him. He stopped. Reconsidered, because she would know the difference, and she always did, and by now he'd stopped trying to give her the version of himself that had worked on everyone else. It's strange, knowing that my father left the key, left the letter, built the evidence, and then couldn't use it himself. He turned the cup in his hands. I've spent 6 years being angry at him, and now it's more complicated than angry. You're grieving him again, she said. A different version of him. He looked at her. The version that was ashamed, she said. The version that spent his last years building something to fix what he'd done, even if he couldn't finish it himself. She paused. That's a harder person to be angry at. Yes, he said. Simply. It's okay for it to be complicated, she said. It doesn't have to resolve into one clean feeling. He looked at her for a moment. When did you get wise? I've always been wise, she said. I just spent 27 years with no one to be wise at. He almost smiled. His phone buzzed on the table between them. He looked at it, looked at her. It's time, he said. She stood, set down her coffee cup, straightened her jacket. Let's go, she said. The arrest happened at 7:14 in the morning outside Victor Harland's office building in Midtown, as he was stepping out of his car, because the people who had coordinated the timing understood the particular value of public moments. There were cameras not because anyone had tipped off the press, but because the press had been watching Harland's building since the first documents had reached the journalists 48 hours earlier. They had been waiting with the patience of people who knew that the story was coming, and that when it arrived, it would be significant. Sophia and Adrian watched it from a car parked half a block away. She watched Victor Harland stop walking, watched the moment he understood what was happening, watched his face go through a rapid sequence of responses: calculation, denial, the specific kind of composure that powerful men reached for when cornered, and then, underneath all of that, something she had not expected. He looked for just a moment like a very old man. Not powerful, not dangerous, just old and caught and finished. Is this what it's supposed to feel like? She said quietly. What does it feel like? Adrian said. She thought about it honestly. Not like winning, not like, she paused. Not like what I imagined revenge would feel like. When I was running through the rain and I didn't know his name or what he'd done, I just knew people were trying to hurt me. I thought if I ever found out who it was, I'd feel. She shook her head. I just feel tired and sad and very, very glad it's over. That's what justice feels like, Adrian said. It's quieter than people expect. She looked at him. Rosa would have wanted to see this, she said. She did see it, Adrian said. She set it in motion. She found you. Everything that happened after started with her. He paused. Give her that. Sophia was silent for a moment. I'm going to find out where she's buried, she said. I'm going to. Her voice caught slightly. She steadied it. I want to tell her it worked. I know that's irrational. It's not irrational, Adrian said. It's the right thing to do. She nodded. On the sidewalk, Victor Harland was being guided into a car. 2 of his associates were already being detained separately. The men who had managed the operational side of his decisions for decades. The people whose names appeared in the documents, whose phone records had been subpoenaed, whose careful professional distances from Harland were, it turned out, not nearly careful enough. The machinery of consequence was very thorough when it was finally given room to operate. Let's go, Sophia said. Where? She looked at him. I have something I need to do, and I'd like you to come with me, if you're willing. He didn't ask what it was. He just started the car. She had found the address 3 days earlier in the city records that Dominic had pulled as part of the broader search. Rosa Caruso, known in her hidden years under 2 different names, had died in a small hospital in Queens 6 days after she'd come to Sophia's apartment. She had been buried quietly, in a cemetery in the eastern part of the borough, in a plot paid for by a woman named Anna Benedetti, who had been, according to the hospital records, her closest friend for the last 15 years. The grave was simple, a stone marker, a name the last name Rosa had used, not her real one, and dates. No other inscription. Sophia stood in front of it for a long time. Adrian stood slightly behind her, and to the left, not crowding, not absent, present in the way that mattered. She had brought flowers, not the kind you bought from a florist to make a statement, but the kind you bought from a corner bodega, because they were real and imperfect and alive. She set them against the base of the stone. She was 64 years old, Sophia said. She spent half her life in hiding and the other half trying to find me. She pressed her lips together. I don't know what she was like. I don't know if she laughed easily, or if she preferred tea to coffee, or what she thought about before she went to sleep. I know almost nothing about her, she paused, except that she came to my door, dying, and she told me to run toward the truth instead of away from it. She crouched down and touched the stone. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were trying to give me, she said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't know your face until it was too late to learn it. Her hand stayed on the stone. But it worked. You were right. He knew what to do. She stayed there for a moment. Then she stood, turned. Adrian was watching her with an expression she had come to recognize over the last 2 weeks, the one that lived on his face, in the moments when he had stopped managing himself and was simply present. It was not a common expression for him. It cost something, she understood. The men in his world, the world he'd been raised in, the world that had shaped every reflex he had, did not wear that expression lightly. Thank you for coming, she said. I wouldn't have been anywhere else. He said. She believed him. 3 days later, Sophia did something she had not done in 5 years. She sat down and she wrote, not notes, not fragments, not the careful, anonymous journaling she'd done in cheap notebooks in her Greenpoint apartment, when life felt too heavy to carry, without putting some of it somewhere outside herself. She wrote with intention, with the specific purposefulness of someone who has a story that belongs not just to herself but to every person who had ever been told their past was damaged, their records burned, their history conveniently unavailable. She wrote for 8 hours the first day, 10 the second. Elena brought her food and coffee and asked no questions, which was exactly what Sophia needed and what Elena, who had spent decades developing the gift of knowing exactly what people needed, understood instinctively. On the third day, Adrian knocked on the door of the study where she'd set up her work. Can I read it, he said. She handed him the first 40 pages. He read them, standing in the doorway, because he didn't want to sit down and have her feel like he was taking over the space. She watched his face as he read, not to gauge whether he liked it, but because his face had become, in the 2 weeks they'd been living in close proximity, something she found genuinely interesting to observe. The way it moved when he was thinking, the way it went very still when something landed. It went still several times. When he was done, he lowered the pages and looked at her. This is extraordinary, he said. No preamble, no softening. It's true, she said. That's all it is. That's not all it is, he said. He held it out to her. Sophia, this is going to matter to people. A lot of people. The people who read this are going to feel less alone. She took the pages back carefully. That's all I want, she said. That's the only thing I want it to do. He nodded. Then it's already doing it, he said. I felt it reading it, and I already know the story. She looked at the pages in her hands. I want to thank you, she said. I've been trying to figure out how to say it properly, and I don't think there's a proper way. So I'm just going to say it directly. She looked up at him. You kept your promise. The one you made when I was unconscious and couldn't hear it. You said you'd find out who I was, and that whoever tried to destroy my life would answer for it. She paused. You did both of those things. You did most of it, he said. We did it, she said, and I don't say that to be modest. I say it because it's true, and because I need you to know that I know it. What you risked going against Carmen, going against what it would mean for your family's reputation, putting your own name in rooms where your family's secrets were being exposed. She shook her head. You didn't have to do any of that. Yes, I did, he said quietly. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I told you I would, he said. And because. He stopped, looked at something past her shoulder for a second, the way he did when he was deciding whether to say the real thing or the manageable version of it. Then he looked back at her. Because you changed something. In how I understand what this family is, and what it's supposed to be. My father built something, and then was too afraid to fix what it had broken. I don't want to be that man. He paused. You gave me a reason not to be. The room was very quiet, Adrian, she said. Don't, he said gently. Not dismissively. I'm not asking for anything. I needed to say it accurately. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. But I'm saying this anyway. You are not the man you think you are. You are not the monster your reputation built. You are the man who drove through the rain and caught a stranger before she hit the pavement and promised her something while she was unconscious. She held his eyes. That's who you are. Whatever else is also true. He said nothing, but something in his face shifted, loosened slightly, the way a thing shifts when it's been held under pressure for a long time and the pressure finally eases. Finish the book, he said. She smiled. I intend to. The public hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November, 6 weeks after Harlan's arrest. Sophia walked into the federal building at 9 in the morning, carrying a leather folio that contained her written statement, the original birth certificate, and a copy of her father's letter, her father's real letter, the one Carmine had kept for 30 years and finally surrendered. Adrian was beside her. Dominic was behind them. 3 federal prosecutors were already inside, having spent the last 5 weeks building a case from the documents in the vault box that was so comprehensive, so layered, so meticulously assembled by a dying man's guilt and his son's determination, that Harlan's legal team had, in a move that surprised no one who understood how these situations resolved, already opened preliminary discussions about cooperation. The hallway outside the hearing room was full of journalists. Sophia had known there would be journalists. She had prepared for it in the abstract, the way you prepared for things that were large and unavoidable, by deciding, in advance, exactly who you were going to be when the moment arrived. She had decided. She was Sophia Caruso. She was 27 years old. She was the daughter of Giovanni Caruso and Maria Valenti, who had loved each other in a world that punished them for it, who had protected her for 2 years at the cost of their lives, who deserved to have their story told by the person they died to keep alive. She walked through the hallway without stopping. One journalist called her name her real name, Sophia, which had been in the documents now and had been reported, carefully, by the journalists who had received the initial materials. She paused. Just for a second. I'll speak after, she said. Inside first, she went in. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Sophia spoke for 40 minutes of it, her written statement, read aloud, and then questions from the committee. She answered every question directly. She did not soften, did not qualify, did not reach for language that made the reality more comfortable. She described what it was to grow up without a past, what it was to have a name that was not hers, a history that was fabricated, a childhood constructed by people who needed her invisible. What it was to run through rain in an industrial district, not knowing who was behind her or why. What it was to hold a birth certificate in her hands for the first time and read a name she didn't recognize as her own and understand, slowly and irreversibly, that it was. She described Rosa. She did not rush through that part. She gave Rosa the full weight of it, every detail she remembered, every word, the way Rosa had cried when she saw Sophia's face, the specific sentence, "Tell him you found the necklace." She made sure Rosa's name was in the record, made sure it was said clearly enough to be recorded, reported, and kept. When she was done, the room was very quiet. One of the committee members, a woman in her 60s, who had been listening with an expression of particular focus through the entire hearing, leaned forward. "Miss Caruso," she said, "in your statement, you say that you are not seeking personal restitution. Can you explain what you are seeking?" Sophia looked at her. "I'm seeking accuracy," she said. "I want the record to be accurate. I want Giovanni and Maria Caruso to exist in the official record as the people they were, not the footnotes they were made into. I want the agreement that erased my identity to be formally acknowledged and formally invalidated. And I want the people who gave the order that resulted in my parents' deaths to be held accountable in a court of law." She paused. "That's not restitution. That's just the truth doing the work it was always supposed to do." The committee member nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Caruso," she said. Adrian was waiting in the hallway when she came out. She had expected him to be there. She had not expected the expression on his face, which was not the controlled, measured expression she was used to, but something rawer and more direct. The face of a man who had spent 4 hours in an anteroom listening to a woman speak about her life and was not entirely sure what to do with what that had produced in him. "How did it go?" he said. "Good," she said, accurately. He studied her. "You were remarkable in there," he said. "You weren't in there," she said. "Dominic was," he said. "He texted me the entire time." She laughed. It came out genuine and slightly surprised, the way laughter did when it caught you before you were ready for it. It was the kind of laugh that belonged to a person who had learned, slowly and against considerable evidence to the contrary, that the world still contained moments worth laughing at. Adrian looked at her when she laughed. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 2 weeks, with the careful, deliberate attention of a man who was not yet sure what to call what he was looking at, but who was very sure he didn't want to stop. "There are journalists outside," Dominic said, appearing from around the corner with his phone already out. "About 40 of them. Sophia, they want a statement." She looked at Dominic, then at Adrian. Then she straightened, squared her shoulders, and said, "Let them wait 2 more minutes." She turned to Adrian. "When this is done," she said, "when the hearing is over and the journalists have their statements, and Victor Harland is in a room answering for what he did, when all of it is done, I want to do something." "What?" he said. "I want to go back to the estate," she said. "I want to sit in the kitchen, and I want Elena to make dinner, and I want to not talk about any of this for a whole evening." She looked at him. "Can we do that?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "We can do that."
Good, she took a breath. Okay.
"Let's go talk to the journalists." She stood on the steps of the federal building, and she spoke without notes. She spoke about identity and the violence of its removal. She spoke about the people who had built her false history, and the people who had kept the true one safe, Rosa, who had hidden for 23 years and come out of hiding to give a dying woman's last gift to a daughter who didn't know she had an aunt. She spoke about her parents, Giovanni and Maria, who had loved each other across a line that other people drew, and who had paid for that love with their lives, and who deserved to be remembered as people, not as a footnote in someone else's strategy. She did not speak about Adrian directly, but when she was done, when the questions had been asked and answered, and the cameras had gotten what they came for, she turned and walked back to where he was standing at the edge of the steps, slightly apart from the crowd, the way he always stood, watching everything, and making himself unobtrusive in the specific way of very powerful people who had learned that the most dangerous position was the obvious one. She walked up to him and stood beside him. "You took my name," she said. Not to him, to the air, to the people who had made those decisions 30 years ago, to the record she was building in her own mind. "You changed my story, but you never had the power to decide my worth." Adrian heard it. He stood beside her, and he heard it, and he said nothing, because nothing was required. She had said what needed to be said. The rest was already done. 6 months later, the book was finished. It was called The Compass Rose for the Pendant, for the symbol that had been pressed into silver as a seal between 2 families, and had ended up around the neck of the child those families had tried to protect, and in protecting, had made invisible. The subtitle was simple: A True Story of Identity, Survival, and the People Who Keep the Truth Alive. The dedication page read, "For Rosa, who kept her promise, and for Giovanni and Maria, who kept me alive long enough to keep mine." It was published in the spring. By summer, it had reached people that Sophia had never expected to reach, people who had lost their histories to circumstance or deliberate erasure, people who had spent their lives being told their pasts were unavailable or irrelevant or too complicated to recover, people who had read the book in one sitting and called the publisher's number because they needed to tell someone what it had done to them. The letters came in stacks. Sophia read everyone. The foundation came from an idea she'd had during the hearing, something the committee members' question had planted without meaning to. She and Adrian established it together, in both their names, which was the kind of thing that generated significant commentary in certain circles of the city, but that neither of them spent any energy engaging with. It focused on people who had lost documented identities through displacement, through deliberate erasure, through the various mechanisms by which powerful systems made people invisible, and it provided legal resources, advocacy, and the specific kind of help that came from someone who understood the problem from the inside. It was Adrian's idea to hire Carmine as an unofficial advisor. Sophia had looked at him when he said it. "Seriously? He knows every method that's been used to erase people's identities in this city for the last 50 years, Adrian said. He knows how the systems work and where the gaps are and who to call to navigate them." And he paused. "He wants to do something with what's left. I think we let him." She had thought about it. "He testifies at the Harlan trial first," she said. "Fully, everything, already agreed, and he takes no credit for the foundation publicly. Also already agreed." "Then fine," she said, "but I'm the one who tells him." She had called Carmine herself. The conversation had been short, and on both sides careful. She had said, "I'm not forgiving you. I want to be clear about that. But I'm also not going to spend the rest of my life defined by what was done to me." So I'm offering you a way to spend what's left of yours doing something useful. A pause. Don't make me regret it. Carmine had been quiet for a long moment. I won't, he'd said. His voice had been the voice of a very old man trying very hard to be, at the end, something worth remembering as. Thank you, Sophia. She had hung up, sat with it. Then she'd gone to find Adrian, and told him it was done. The night the book launched, a small event, not a party. Just a reading at a bookstore in the West Village that Sophia had chosen because it was the kind of place where people actually came for the books, and not for the event of being seen at the event. Adrian stood in the back of the room and listened to her read. She read the first chapter, the opening, which began not with her birth or her false identity, or the night she ran through the rain, but with Rosa, with the image of an old woman standing at the door of a Greenpoint apartment, already crying before she'd said a word, having spent 23 years working up to this moment. The room was very still. Adrian stood in the back and watched her read to a room of people who had come as strangers and were leaving as something else. And he felt something that he had spent 40 years, largely, avoiding, not because he hadn't wanted it, but because the world he'd been given had not left much room for it. The specific feeling of a life being more than the sum of its obligations. After the reading, after the questions and the signing and the slow, warm dispersal of the crowd, Sophia found him by the door. You stayed the whole time, she said. I told you I would, he said. She smiled. Come on, she said. Elena made dinner. She's been texting me since 6 o'clock. They walked out together into the spring evening, into the city that had tried for 30 years to keep its secrets and had discovered, as cities always eventually did, that secrets were not permanent. They were only compressed. And compressed things, given enough time and enough pressure from the right direction, always found their way out. She had arrived in Adrian Valenti's arms with no name and no past, and nothing to hold onto except a pendant that she hadn't known the meaning of. She left that chapter of her life as Sophia Caruso, daughter, survivor, author, and the founder of something that would outlast the people who had tried to make her disappear. She had not found herself because someone had given her back her name. She had found herself because she had refused even running through rain, even collapsing on a wet street in a part of the city where no one asked questions, to stop moving toward the truth. And the man who had caught her when she fell had kept his promise. Every word of it, that was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough, and for two people who had spent their lives in a world that specialized in taking things away, exactly enough was everything.